How's it going, guys? My name is Zach with the Movie Castle, and today we're going to be talking about Silent Night, Deadly Night 3, Better Watch Out. This is from 1989 and is directed by Monte Hellman, and this movie stars Bill Moseley as Ricky this time around, and we also have Samantha Scully and Richard Beymer. And this movie is sadly the most forgettable one in the series from what I gather. This should have been big and over the top and crazy. There's several things in here that on paper should really stand out. I mean, in part 2, Eric Freeman gave this big, crazy, over-the-top performance for Ricky. And it was very memorable. Cheesy, yes, but very memorable. And now we get Bill Moseley doing the role in this movie. Bill Moseley, you remember for Chop Top from Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. He can do big, crazy, over-the-top, and that's probably why they initially hired him. I would bet that that was their original idea, and then somewhere along the way it changed. Because you think that that's why you would use Bill Moseley, but instead, Ricky in this movie is kind of a weird knockoff of Michael Myers with a little tiny pinch of Freddy Krueger. Like, he's stumbling around, silent, almost like a zombie killer, and even has his own Dr. Loomis coming after him. He's not big and over-the-top and crazy, and for whatever reason, they didn't do that. They also gave him this weird psychic link plot. He's got his brain reconstructed so he has a glass dome on his head, and you can see into his brain, and he has a psychic connection with this one girl who can dream and see him, and you would think that that would be weird and crazy, but it just leads to a couple dream sequences and a little bit of exposition, and, you know, it's really not the weird, crazy dream subplot. It's not Slumber Party Massacre Part 2, so it's this weird element that doesn't go crazy. You know, I expected this to be a good slasher, maybe a so bad it's good movie, but it really isn't. It has these weird, cheesy elements that somehow come off as forgettable and not big over the top and cheesy. And speaking of it being a slasher, that's the other really disappointing part. If you do a slasher movie, you know, that's what you do. You have fun, crazy, over-the-top kills. And if you have a low budget, like this movie does, you scrap other things and make sure you at least get those kills right. But this movie doesn't do that. All the kills in this movie are terrible, boring, and forgettable. Most of them are off-screen. A lot of them are the classic camera rushes at a person, they scream, but then that's it. They go, ah, and then it cuts off. And if we ever do see a kill, it's usually just a relatively standard stabbing whatever. Like, we don't see most of them, and the stuff that we do see is just really lame. You know, you're a slasher movie, you know, this is extreme stuff, you know, but you're not doing that. So, yeah, it's forgettable in the concept of it being this weird psychic link movie, and it's forgettable in terms of slasher movies, and, yeah, that really is sad that they had a lot of potential. You're finally giving Ricky his full movie. You know, you don't have Eric Freeman back, but you have Bill Moseley, but you're gonna waste the character. You know, it's really a waste of Bill Moseley in this movie, and yeah, it's just really forgettable. I think this was the first one of the series to be released direct-to-video, and yeah, it kind of shows here. I hear the other two, I'm gonna watch them pretty soon. I hear the other two actually do go crazy, so I'm looking forward to that. But yeah, this movie, it's just surprisingly underwhelming. Let's go ahead and talk a bit about the plot. I'm not going to be doing any major spoilers, but I do want to say my piece on a few plot points and make sure you guys have a basic understanding as to what this movie's about. We open up with our main girl, and she has psychic powers. It's something that's hereditary. Her grandmother has this as well, and she, can see visions. She's blind, but she every now and then can get visions. And this doctor, played by the guy from Twin Peaks, this doctor has reconstructed Billy's brain. After he was shot at the end of Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2, they had to put his brain back together and seal it in with this glass dome. It's an interesting special effect, but it ultimately goes nowhere. And plus, didn't Silent Night, Deadly Night Part 2 have like a close-up of Billy's face right near the end? No, Ricky's face, sorry. Didn't it end with a close-up of Ricky's face? And it didn't really look too messed up. You know, he was shot, but it seemed to be primarily in the chest. But here they talk about how his brain was all over the pavement, and I don't really remember that from Part 2, but whatever. But anyway, the doctor is using the girl with psychic powers and rigging it up to send her into Ricky's dreams, kind of Inception style. And you do get a kind of fun dream sequence where she's running around a white-halled labyrinth, and she eventually sees Ricky stumbling around in his hospital gown, and she also sees a Santa Claus that, even though looks really nice, does turn out to be evil. So it's an okay dream sequence, but she gets out and she describes what she says and what she saw, and she says, "I don't know if I want to do this anymore." The doctor encourages her to think about it, and she says, "I'll think over Christmas break." You know, it's Christmas, so she's going to go to her grandmother's house, and she goes to the grandmother's house with her brother and her brother's girlfriend, which the brother's girlfriend looks surprisingly similar to her. They're both very similar looking girls, and every now and then I would get mixed up as to which one's on screen, you know? Luckily, the main girl has these weird little stick figure earrings that help me tell them apart a little bit, but they both look pretty similar, a little bit like Jennifer Connelly, you know? So, they are very similar looking women. It may just be that I'm not the best at recognizing people, but yeah, the brother and his girlfriend, and for whatever reason, the main girl is just constantly rude to the brother's girlfriend, even though this is the first time they met, and they're not really, you know, like, they don't really have a history of hating each other, but whatever. They're going out to their grandmother's house, which, of course, they'll find abandoned, and the scene at grandmother's house, it really should have been like a Friday the 13th movie, but it goes really slow, and then when we do finally get to the ending, it's okay. It leads to some, you know, chases and cat and mouse stuff, but it really could have been a lot better. In the final bit, I won't spoil the ending of the movie, but the final climax to all the slasher stuff is just pretty weak, the last moment there. But anyway, how we get the slasher stuff is because, of course, Ricky is coming. Ricky, he's in the hospital, and a drunken Santa Claus stumbles into his room and starts insulting him. And that, plus the psychic link, is enough to finally get Ricky to snap awake. He snaps awake, he kills the Santa Claus, and leaves the room. And one of the weirdest, most baffling parts of this movie is, you know, why didn't he take the Santa suit? He didn't take the Santa suit. That was a big thing of the first two movies, is it was a killer dressed up like Santa Claus, but we're not getting this. Can you imagine if Michael Myers killed a mechanic and didn't take the jumpsuit? That's just weird, but yeah, Ricky is not dressed up like Santa Claus this movie, and that's really disappointing. That's a waste, and it takes down the Christmassy level of this. So, no killer Santa this time around. Ricky does start to hitchhike in the direction of Grandma's house, And people are oddly okay with this guy. He's in a hospital gown, and he's got a dome where you can see his brain, yet someone still picks him up as a hitchhiker. You think if you saw that guy on the side of the road, you would call the police because he clearly needs help. You know, a guy in a hospital gown alone probably shouldn't be wandering the streets. He probably needs help. He probably needs to go back to the hospital. But he's also got an exposed brain, and you think that if you saw that guy, you would go and say, hey, someone send him back to the hospital. But no, people are chill with it, and they let him hitchhike, so whatever. But anyway, how he knows where grandmother's house is because he has that psychic link and can see the main girl now. And when someone reads out the directions, he hears that and knows where he's supposed to be going. The psychic link does work both ways, and the main girl gets to see a little bit of Ricky's origin story, which leads to more flashbacks, leads to more stock footage from part 1. Overall, it's not an egregious amount, but after part 2, you show just a little bit of footage from part 1, and yeah, the fans are going to be like, oh no, they're not going to do that again. And they don't go for too long, but it is like, oh no, more flashbacks. But also noteworthy is they flash back to the part when Ricky was a baby. And I said in my review for part 2, there's no way that Ricky remembers this. Someone just told him because he was a baby at the time. And Ricky said, no, I remember because I was there. And granted, the main girl is pulling this memory out of his head. I guess he did remember. I guess he really has this memory from when he was a baby. That's pretty weird. But anyway, Ricky does go to the cabin, and while all this is going on, you do get the guy from Twin Peaks essentially being Dr. Loomis, riding around with a cop and talking about how we have to find them. And you do get scenes, vague talks about science and philosophy, and also a weird scene where the cop is trying to sell the psychiatrist a car phone or something. So yeah, it's a lot of it is basically just filler, you know, fill up the screen with some two people talking in a car. And I think as they're driving, they're really riding a car, so the camera does bump up and down a little bit. So that, you know, yeah, it's a little interesting, but basically just filler. And it does lead to just a so-so finale, you know, like I said earlier. And the biggest thing, and I mentioned this earlier, you know, it's a slasher movie whose kills suck. And there's not that many of them, and they're mainly off-screen. Off-screen kills are always the worst. Maybe if it leads to tension, where we really care about the character and then don't know if they're safe, and if it leads to a big and bloody and memorable reveal, then I guess I could get an off-screen kill. But when I can tell you're doing it just because you don't have the budget, really find some other way to cut the budget and put time into the most important part. So there's that, and also they really wasted, you had Bill Moseley and you didn't use him. The psychic link stuff just serves for exposition. It doesn't really do much for the story other than explain why the killer wants to go after the girl and how he knows where she is, and also reminds the audience from the girl's perspective the events of the first movie, which are kind of irrelevant because, you know, if you watch the first movie, it's a really good, solid slasher. It's serious. And if you were to watch the first movie and then be told that by part 3 you'd get a psychic link story with a guy with his brain under a dome, like, you wouldn't believe it, you know? So they've gone so far from part 1 that, you know, it really doesn't even feel like the same thing anymore. But whatever. Overall, I mean, it's watchable, but it's so forgettable. I watched this movie not too terribly long ago, and I already feel like I've forgotten large chunks of this, so yeah, there's that. But I hear the next two are better. I'm going to try to get them out before December's over, so I'm going to watch the next two really quick. Part 4, Initiation, and Part 5, The Toy Maker. That sounds interesting. Anyway, to everyone who's watched so far, thank you for watching. To everyone who's liked and subscribed, thank you. You really are helping the channel out. I'll leave a relevant playlist on the bottom. If you guys want to see more, you can click right there and see more. I should have a Silent Night, Deadly Night playlist where you can see my reviews for Part 1, Part 2, and also the remake. So if you want to see more of this, and then by the time I record 4 and 5, those will wind up in there eventually. Anyway, have a good day. I'll see you guys again very, very soon. Relevant playlist on the bottom. Have a good day now.